iconic activist, artist, and singer, Mr. Harry Belafonte, as I mentioned in the opening of the show, passed away earlier this week at the age of 96. He was at his home in Manhattan, and the cause of death was congestive heart failure. I want you to watch this from the 2005 Congressional Black Caucus Town Hall. Look at what Mr. Belafonte had to say.
Harry Belafonte, thank you. Thank you for a lifetime of commitment and struggle. And it's a man who is the 21st century's example of the great Frederick Douglass, who speaks truth to power. And you should know that we not only appreciate it, but we respect what you do and what you stand for: unbought, unbossed, and unbound. That is unique in America today. Thank you.
Indeed, unique in America today. It was unique when those accolades were being spoken about Mr. Belafonte, and still unique today. Unbossed, unbought, and unbound. We're gonna have to add something to the show. Unbossed, unbought, unbossed, unbound, absolutely. And his stature as an artist was huge, but his role in the civil rights movement was even greater. Mr. Belafonte always spoke truth to power. And going back to that 2005 video, I want you to watch this powerful story about a particular moment he remembers with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.
Martin said, I've been thinking long and hard about our struggle. We worked tenaciously for our rights. And the culmination of all that effort will be reflected in what we've come to call the integration movement. And I sit here deeply concerned that I suspect we are leading our nation on an integration trip that has us integrating into a burning house.
So as Mr. Belafonte reflects on that, and you can hear the emotion from the audience, I mean, people just paused. You definitely got to go back and watch this video in its full entirety. We are showing excerpts here, but as you heard or watching, if you could see the sternness in Mr. Belafonte's face as he was recalling a conversation that he had with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was troubled and fearing that he was leading our people, at that time he was talking about Black Americans, into a burning house. He spoke more to what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was referencing to which it was a powerful anthology and forewarning. Take a look.
We were winning on a lot of frontiers. Bull Connor had been confronted. The bus boycotts had worked. Votes were coming. Even Lyndon Baines Johnson had been struck by the spirit and got up and talked about "we shall overcome" in the Congress. For Dr. King to have been in this place at a time when we seemed to have been making great headway was a moment to pause and reflect. That reflection has taken longer than I had suspected it would, but it has certainly come to reveal itself fully when we look at the condition in which we find not only our world, but in particular, our nation.
Yeah, the conditions. And just go ahead and put Yasmin up. We're gonna jump right into this. Yasmin, before I go on with this segment, just really powerful words from Mr. Belafonte as he reflected on what the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was agonizing over, whether or not this experiment, this thing, this how he was helping to lead Black people, was it in fact the right thing to do? And also reflecting that so much of the conditions that Black people found themselves in. Now, Mr. Belafonte was at a 2005, let me remind people, Black Caucus Town Hall, and reflecting in that moment from conversations that he had with the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the 20th century, right? And he's bringing that to bear in the 21st century. But I was really struck by the word, the conditions really has not changed. And he said, although we've made a whole lot of progress, it's just something not quite right about this moment. And I tell you, Yasmin, I feel as though the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s message and how Mr. Belafonte was revealing what Dr. King said to him, that it speaks to us to this very day. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I just mentioned that I did a video this morning about the history in this country, and it was so interesting because we talk about so many of these issues as if they're new, as if they're just coming up now, and that they're like specifically relevant to this modern era, but really they're not, right? And if you look at whether it's race or religion or whatever it is in this country, if you go back tens or hundreds of years, you'll see that those issues were there in some way, shape, or form. But I do want to say, I love that we're talking about Harry Belafonte today. He is somebody who actually had some significance in my life in a way that I don't think a lot of people might realize. On a bit of a personal note, he was born in the US to parents who immigrated to the US from Jamaica. And I was born in the US to parents who immigrated from Guyana. And even though Guyana is geographically in South America, it's much more culturally similar to the West Indies because of the ethnic makeup and the shared histories regarding slavery and indentured servitude and that kind of thing. So Harry Belafonte was a big deal in our community as well as in the Black American community. And I remember my aunt actually told me a story one time, and I think it was like back in the late 80s when he did a show in New York, and my mom and her sisters went. And they took my cousin with them, who was a small child at the time, and they got to meet him after the show. And my cousin looked at him and says, "I saw you on Sesame Street." And he threw his head back and laughed. So he got a bit of a kick out of that. But on a less personal note, I think one of the great things about Harry Belafonte is that he was a first generation American who fought as an American to make his home a better place. I think there's often a lot of unspoken emotional, maybe cultural baggage that first generation Americans can carry or hang on to that they inherited from their parents, for better or for worse, in terms of the immigrant struggle, the struggle for acceptance, the struggle to not lose your cultural identity while assimilating into a completely different culture. It's something that I think about a lot, actually, if not almost always. But at the heart of that struggle is love. You do it because you love this place that is your home, however imperfect it may be, and because your parents fought and sacrificed to get you here. And for me, that's what Harry Belafonte represents. He represents all of that. So I'm glad to be honoring him today.
Yeah, absolutely. We started yesterday, Yasmin. It just was not enough time. And so it was important to me to come back to this. This man certainly deserves so much more. And people may have noticed that there were two people on either side of Mr. Harry Belafonte. One was Senator Hillary Clinton and the other was Senator Barack Obama.